How about now? Hey, DawgNation, happy Wednesday. My name's Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. I turned the microphone off. I'm sure he's probably thrilled with the fact that I did that. But nonetheless, we are happy to have all of you with us today. Very busy show. Interesting stuff from Brenton Cox. We'll obviously touch on that. I thought Kirby Smart, though, on Tuesday night said some really interesting things with the Georgia defense. Obviously, right now, Georgia defense takes center stage. That's true again against Tennessee on Saturday. We will talk a bunch about that on today's program. The weather, a little bit of an issue in the SEC. We'll kind of cover some of that kind of stuff, too. Mike Griffith is here as well. So what do you say we get it started? DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, at times I can probably be a little bit predictable. I would say I'm going to do something in a couple of minutes that almost all of you who follow the news can probably guess I'm going to do. I am definitely going to take the bait on what Florida pass rusher Brenton Cox has said about Georgia here over the course of the last 24 hours. We will get into that coming up in just a couple of minutes. But I don't want to start with that because I'm in too good of a mood. I don't want to go down that road as of yet. I'm going to take the high road here for a couple of minutes. And I want to talk about the Georgia defense heading into Tennessee coming up on Saturday, because I thought that Kirby Smart had some very interesting things to say about this Georgia defense yesterday and kind of how he views defensive football in general. But as a way of setting up that, I want to kind of go back to yesterday's podcast for a moment. We had Connor Riley on the show. Connor said, do you think there's a chance that Georgia's defense is the best unit in the SEC on either side of the ball? You know, you think about the prolific offenses, you think about the other defenses. Is there a chance right now that Georgia's defense is the best unit in the SEC? And he and I kind of kicked that around, debated that a little bit. You should go and check out yesterday's edition of our program to hear more of that. But with that kind of topic in mind, I thought it was interesting to hear Rick Neuheisel, former Colorado, Washington, UCLA coach. I believe that's the full resume for Mr. Neuheisel. He is now a CBS analyst. And on CBS Sports Network this week, in making his pick for the Georgia-Tennessee game, Neuheisel kind of took the baton on that debate point and essentially made the case for UGA. This is actually pretty interesting stuff, and it's obviously relevant going into Tennessee on Saturday. Let you hear from the CBS Sports Network from Rick Neuheisel.
That defense has been the most impressive side of the ball, and that's saying that a lot when you have Alabama offense and also Florida's offense in the SEC. Georgia's defense, they fly around and play beautiful. And Jim Chaney, the offensive coordinator for Tennessee, wants to be plotting, there's not a lot of explosion in their offense. I don't see it happening against this defense. Yeah. I'm going Georgia.
All right. Adam Zucker not all that enthused by the pick there at the end. All right. I guess he was expecting somebody to make the case for Tennessee there. But Rick Neuheisel says it's the best unit in the entire SEC. The Georgia defense, he says, better than the Alabama offense, which, by the way, will be relevant next Saturday when these two teams get together, and better than the Florida offense, too. And I think this is probably true right now, and obviously there's a chance that I'm biased. But as we said before, the biggest bias in college football isn't guy who touts for his favorite team. The biggest bias in college football is, and you see this with huge swaths of the media all the time, is in favor of offense over defense. And what Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts have done for the Gators, getting more attention than what, guys like Azeez Ojulari have done for the Georgia defense, not because the media likes Florida and hates Georgia, but because the media can't sort of see beyond the offensive side of the ball. So it's kind of nice to hear Neuheisel, and probably, true that he's a former coach. Maybe he has a little bit different perspective on the game. It's kind of nice to hear him arguing for the Georgia defense, and I think through 2 weeks, this has definitely been true. I mean, I think it's also objectively true that what Georgia did against Auburn last Saturday is the most impressive performance thus far in the SEC this season. Now, there's still a lot more data points to come in, but through 2 weeks, the most sound, the most solid, the most thorough victory of good team over another good team is what Georgia did against Auburn on Saturday, and I would dare say for those in the country who are playing college football, that's also true as well. Now, Georgia's got the job of keeping that going here this upcoming week, and the defense for Georgia going to take a center stage in trying to do that. With that in mind, Kirby, when he spoke to reporters last night, was asked a lot of questions about his defense. And there was one moment in particular that I thought, this is kind of uncommonly candid from Kirby Smart, going into a little bit more detail than maybe he typically would. I thought Kirby's a little bit of a salty mood, frankly, from watching the press conference from afar last night. But here's one moment when she was kind of willing to talk a little bit, when he was asked by a reporter, hey, what do you want the identity of your defense to be? Rick Neuheisel says it's the best unit in the SEC. What does good defense mean to you? And I thought we got some pretty good stuff from Kirby on that. Listen to this from Kirby from last night.
If you had to define a great defense, it would be relentless effort. It would be, reckless abandon, constant pressure and pursuit, not giving up explosives. And we've done a good job of that, but we also did probably play one of our worst defensive games last year against Tennessee. When you look at it in terms of tackling, getting pushed around, big plays, just was not indicative of who we are or want to be.
I think it's also probably fair to point out that Tennessee at the receiver position was better last year than they probably are right now. But Smart's also right to point out, for as good as we've been through 2 weeks, he could say, you're still only as good as your next performance. And just given the fact that you can stymie an offense play after play after play, but if they hit you for one big explosive after being stopped 4 or 5 times in a row, then the scoreboard essentially looks the same. And obviously, that's just the challenge of playing against SEC offenses, is that you can win 2 out of every 3 battles, but if that third battle becomes an explosive play for the other side, the scoreboard's not going to look very pretty. So Kirby Smart's obviously remembering what happened in the first half last year against Tennessee and on guard for those same kind of things against Jim Chaney on Saturday. Neuheisel a moment ago said that he doesn't think that Chaney wants to be very explosive, wants to be more plotting. I'm not quite so sure that's the case against Georgia on Saturday. I think this is an example, as almost a poker analogy, that when you have a chance to go all in, you got to put your chips in the center of the table and try to get what you can. That's sort of what I expect from Chaney coming up on Saturday. One more thing from Kirby on the defense, by the way. Yesterday during the show, we talked about what Bill Connolly from ESPN said, that if you want to go back and look at all the Kirby Smart defenses, the ones from Georgia, the time in which he was defensive coordinator at Alabama, that this might be Kirby Smart's coaching masterpiece. This might be, of all the things that Kirby tries to get from a defense, and we just heard him describe what it is that he's looking for, this might be the best version of all of that ever. Connolly's word masterpiece here I thought was pretty interesting. But also Smart yesterday was pretty quick to let folks know that when you look at this defense, don't look at him as like to use a fancy French word, the auteur of this defense, that Kirby doesn't necessarily want to be seen that way. Let me let you hear from Kirby once again.
It's not my defense. It's the University of Georgia's defense. It's Coach Lanning and the defensive staff and the defensive players. I'm not sitting here trying to take credit for something those guys have done. I certainly put blood, sweat, and tears in with the rest of them, but those guys put a lot of hard work in to making decisions, and the players don't buy into what you do defensively. It's not any good. I think Dan and his staff do a tremendous job selling who we are to the players, and Dan imparts his personality on that, and I think the players appreciate that. I don't think it's a one-person gig.
Probably fair to say that the credit for why the defense has played so well does deserve to be split up a little bit, giving some of that to Kirby, some of that to Lanning, and obviously the players who play in that. I think Kirby Smart's well within his right to describe it that way, and I think it's also appropriate for us to kind of begin the show the last couple of days talking about this Georgia defense, because it's going to be on display again on Saturday. One of the main reasons that some people think that Georgia can win again, even though Tennessee's undefeated, and some of the reason why people think it can still be comfortable in terms of a final margin of victory for Georgia in this game, is because of what this Georgia defense is able to do. Keeping pace with the very best offenses in the SEC, the very best units in all of college football. Georgia right now, a national championship contender, and with all due respect to Stetson Bennett and how the offense has played, at least as of late, the defense may be the number one reason why. All right, let me shift gears and talk about this just for a moment. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because I'm in too good of a mood to be dragged into the gutter by this, but yesterday, former Georgia Bulldog turned Florida Gator, pass rusher for the Gators, Brenton Cox, was speaking with reporters. And listen, I don't want to make more of this than it is because Cox spoke on a number of subjects, but the Georgia game did come up, and Brenton did not hold back on his feelings about that. You can read more about this at DawgNation.com. I'm going to read a couple of sentences here from Brenton Cox as quoted by the FloridaRivals.com site. This is just another example of Florida kind of doing what it does, seemingly embracing trash talk and sort of big talk even weeks in advance of a game, Georgia just does not do this kind of stuff. I'm really glad. Can I show the Brenton Cox thing here? Maybe we don't quite have that ready to go. But what Cox basically says is that this is personal between he and Georgia, that he's looking forward to taking on Georgia coming up here this season, and he expects his team to get a W there in that game. As I said before, you can go and read that for yourself at DawgNation.com. And this is just one of those things where if you're Georgia, this is the perfect gift. And listen, I'm not going to bash Cox. I think this is, he's not the only Florida player to ever do something like this. Florida players have kind of done this, kind of over the years. But this is not what Georgia does. Georgia has made it very clear over the years that it does its talking with its helmets. Kirby Smart has said that. He said that in reference to Florida before. So whether it be an institutional thing where they appear to be making fun of Georgia's streak without winning a national championship, or some of the things that were said about Jake Fromm before the 2017 game, or whatever else, this is just what Florida likes to do. This is what they kind of Brenton Cox fits right in terms of doing all that kind of stuff. And it could not be a bigger and better gift for Georgia, because by the time you get to Florida, as big as that game is, Georgia will have been through a grind, a very tough front-loaded schedule, 5 weeks in a row of SEC play, a week off, and the Gators after that. That kind of renewed sense of energy that you need, trash talk like this just provides that for Georgia. And to say nothing of the fact that Florida is playing a losable game on Saturday against Texas A&M. I know the Aggies weren't good last week against Alabama, but the idea that anyone would be busy talking about a future opponent weeks in advance of playing a game where Florida has to go on the road this Saturday and is only about a touchdown favorite. And by the way, this Gators defense that Brenton Cox supposedly leads has been awful thus far this year. For every yard Florida's gained, the Florida defense has essentially given up the same amount on the other side. My advice to Brenton Cox would be to stop talking trash and worry about what you got to do this upcoming Saturday. But as I said before, it's just another reason why Georgia-Florida is going to be big when the game is played, and for Georgia, who'll use whatever bulletin board material it can get at its disposal. This is another example of that. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, whether it be Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really appreciate you being with us. Also, our friends at Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, we certainly appreciate them making it possible. There's two great locations for Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. There's the original. There's also Harrah's Cherokee Valley River. They're both about a 2-hour drive from Atlanta. Really easy to get to, and just that great getaway that you deserve, whether it be the gaming floor you want to take advantage of, or the restaurant options, the luxury accommodations, there's spa, there's shopping, there's everything there when it comes to our friends at a Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. It's the getaway that you need, and it's even better than ever before, because in this time when we're all thinking about health and safety and social distancing, listen, Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort's done a great job of doing that on their gaming floor, finding a way to make it kind of a healthy and safe thing for you, even in a time which maintaining that social distance, that 6 feet of space, really matters. They do a good time with that. It's also the best time to join Caesars Rewards as well. Weekdays right now, you can receive $50 in free play, so check out the website for more on that. It's Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee. All right, it's going to be Mike Griffith here coming up in just a moment. Before we do that, though, let's go around the doghouse, delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. And I think there's a fun thing to think about when you start looking ahead to Tennessee on Saturday for Georgia. After a good bit of talk on the defense, let's go offensive side of the ball for a moment. I saw Trey McKitty, the Georgia tight end, last week in uniform, going through some warm-ups prior to the start of the game against Auburn. Did not play in that game, but in a question yesterday about both McKitty and freshman tight end Darnell Washington, who we have seen a little bit from thus far this season, Kirby Smart struck a hopeful tone that maybe the former Florida State Seminole might make his UGA debut coming up this Saturday. This is nice to hear. Here's Kirby on McKitty.
I'm hopeful that Trey's going to be able to go. He practiced today, did a good job. We thought he was going to be ready for last week, and didn't want to have to play him unless we had to. Darnell has done a good job. He's been kind of thrown in the fire. I wish his conditioning was at a higher level. I wish he could sustain his high speeds longer. He gets tired pretty quick, but he is physical. He's not afraid of contact, and he's got great hands.
Listen, I'll be the first to tell you, first of all, I have liked what I've seen from Darnell Washington thus far. The buzz about him as a high school prospect is easy to understand right now. I would say that he's not quite a finished product yet. He's got, stuff that he's still working on that Smart described. Eventually, though, you're going to see some probably pretty spectacular moments from him in a Georgia uniform. But on the subject of McKitty here for a moment, I hope I'm not setting myself up for too much in terms of my expectations for McKitty, but when he finally does play, be it this Saturday against Tennessee or maybe next week against Alabama, my guess is that McKitty's going to be a weapon for Georgia. This is a guy that caught a lot of balls at Florida State. This is a guy in a Todd Monken offense that I think is a matchup nightmare. One of the things that Kirby has said a lot is, you're going to see a lot of man coverage. You'll see it against Tennessee. Obviously, Alabama wants to do that too. And where you kind of go to kind of exploit those matchups, McKitty, possibly guarded by a linebacker, something along those lines, that becomes the kind of matchup that a Todd Monken offense might be able to exploit. I have, a high level of expectation for what McKitty's going to be able to do. So when he finally does make his UGA debut, and I hope it's this Saturday against Tennessee, I think there's a chance it's a sizable impact McKitty provides for the Georgia offense. So we will keep our eye on that and talk to Mike Griffith about that coming up a little bit more in just a moment. It's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. Marco's is America's most beloved pizza. It's real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. And I mentioned health and safety before, and Marco's Pizza obviously takes all this stuff really seriously. The pizza that you get delivered to you is cooked in a 450-degree oven. It's contactless, touchless after that. So you can have great peace of mind about the food that you're serving for you and for your family. They're doing a great job with that. Also great savings as well, including this deal. How about a large one-topping pizza, 10 chicken wings or dippers? Right now it's just $17.99. Order that online at the Marco's app or online as well at marcos.com. You can check that out. And, of course, we appreciate Around the Doghouse being delivered to us today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. All right, before we're done on today's show, a little bit of an update on UGA recruiting. Some really good stuff from Jeff Sintel as of late on that. We'll talk about how Kirby Smart's kind of navigating the recruiting world right now with dead periods and the inability to kind of do things in a normal way. Weather has impacted an SEC game officially now. We'll tell you about that here coming up in just a moment. But a lot to do on Georgia and Tennessee. Let's do it with a guy right now who knows both teams very well. Let's talk to Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll get ready to talk to Mike Griffith here right now, and let me just begin this way on the subject that I was just addressing. Mike, I hope I'm not getting my expectations up too high for this, because clearly I'm a Georgia partisan who wants them to do well. But I think when Trey McKitty finally makes his Georgia debut, I think he's an impact player. I think he's a guy that Georgia's going to target, going to try to throw to. I think we've already seen some of that from Todd Monken getting tight ends involved, at least trying to. And I think McKitty, when you start thinking about sort of man coverage matchups that he might be facing, that's a guy that Monken might be able to exploit. I don't know if it's this Saturday against Tennessee or next week against Alabama, but when McKitty finally does play, I think he's going to matter for Georgia. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think he's a matchup problem. He's 6'5", 245. He runs really well. The Senior Bowl's already got an eye on him. He's an NFL player. And, I'm not saying he's going to have a Pitts effect, but, this is a guy that is a matchup problem. And, with Stetson Bennett's arm strength, he needs to be able to find the tight end as well as the slot. So this is a really important guy to be getting back.
And I know people love Darnell Washington. We heard Kirby talk about him yesterday, and I like Washington as well. I just think there's something to be said for a guy like McKitty who has played before. Washington has the kinds of things that can't be coached and the kind of thing that only few people were kind of given the physical gifts from God that Darnell's been given. But there's something to be said for experience, and that's kind of what McKitty brings to the table. And eventually, I don't want to say he'll have the same impact that Lawrence Cager had a year ago when he was healthy, but Cager kind of showed you a year ago that when a guy shows up on campus having played FBS snaps, Power 5 snaps somewhere else, that experience sometimes is kind of hard to duplicate.
Yeah, Nakobe Dean made that point yesterday, B.A. He said that he thought it was important to get McKitty out there because of his experience. Said he was a leader. And, you look around that Georgia offensive huddle, there's not a lot of guys that have played a lot of snaps really outside of Trey Hill and Ben Cleveland.
So when you shift the gears to Tennessee here fully for the game on Saturday, I'm a believer that Tennessee has improved. I expect Georgia to win this game. A couple touchdowns seems like a reasonable point spread. I don't think Tennessee's quite ready to come into Athens and win a game like this as of yet. But this game is more of a challenge for Georgia, I believe, than I probably thought it was going to be when I first started looking at this stuff back during the season. I think through 2 weeks, Tennessee's actually been pretty impressive. not a perfect game last Saturday against Missouri. They gave up some pass rush stuff to the Tigers, but they still won with a comfortable margin of victory, took care of South Carolina in week 1. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Jeremy Pruitt's team has turned a corner, and all of a sudden they've kind of gone from being one of the bad teams to now being a team that can beat the bad teams, and that's at least something. Do you see an improved version of the Vols coming in here on Saturday?
Yeah, it's a more physical version of the Vols, and it's a game of matchups, and they've got a very good offensive line. And against Georgia, you need to have that just to get started. We saw that with the Auburn game. So the fact they've got a good offensive line and have a chance to have some degree of balance gives them an opportunity. Now, but yeah, I still think they got to make some plays on the perimeter, and I still think Jared Garantano's got to make some big-time throws, and I think they probably need some help from Georgia if Georgia's offense were to struggle. But are they better than the South Carolina team that beat Georgia last year in Sanford Stadium? I think so.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And now I want to talk to you about the Georgia offense against the Tennessee defense in a moment, but let me stay on the side of the ball that you were just mentioning. I know you asked Kirby yesterday about matching up against Jim Chaney, and clearly Kirby's got a lot of history with him because they work together. And as Kirby pointed out, there's also a lot that Chaney can do. You won't see it all here in this game, but this is one of those things. If you're Jim Chaney, I think, and I'm like you, I'm not sold on the Tennessee wide receivers as of yet. I do think they're better in the running game than they were last year, and probably a little worse at wide receiver. But if Chaney, who knows, he's probably going to see his offense get stymied, a good bit. If you can find those moments and exploit that, go all in for a couple of explosive plays, kind of like the busted play that Arkansas took advantage of in week 1. That's probably the way that Tennessee stays close in this game, right? Chaney working with Garantano. If you see, a man coverage situation you'd exploit, trying to go all in and just get whatever big play you can, because you are certainly not going to nibble 5 yards at a time on the way down the field against this Georgia defense right now. You're just not going to do that.
Yeah, you got to take advantage of your opportunities. On that play, Aziz lost contain, and that enabled Frank to get outside the pocket and buy some time, and Rich got caught with his eyes in the backfield. So, certainly they'll take advantage of that. I think you'll see a little bit more of the screen game. You might try to neutralize that Georgia pass rush a little bit. We've talked so much about havoc and pressure. Well, that can be used against you. So I expect to see a good screen game, some counter plays. But the big deal is getting Garantano outside the pocket and buying enough time for him to get downfield. Like you said, make the big play.
So let's talk about the Georgia offense against the Tennessee defense for a minute. Last week, I expected more than one Georgia quarterback to play. I assumed there'd still be a role a little bit for Dwan Mathis last week. That obviously didn't happen. Stetson Bennett was the entirety of the Georgia game plan, and he played well. Given how he played last week, I don't think he'll be looking over his shoulder this week. I'm assuming this game belongs fully to Stetson Bennett right now. But do you think the Georgia offense has now turned a corner? This group played, I would say, really pretty well a week ago. Do you expect that to continue with a quarterback who's still relatively new to all of this and an offense that's still kind of trying to get used to everything that Todd Monken wants them to do? Do you expect to see Georgia pick up where it left off offensively a week ago, where I really thought it kind of got the job done against Auburn?
Yeah, I think the air raid principles are here to stay, and we'll just have to see how Tennessee defends Stetson. If they can successfully take the short game away, he'll be pressed to get the ball to the perimeter receivers. I mean, it was great to see Jarris Jackson with 9 catches and 147 yards, but it wasn't great to see George Pickens only get 2 catches, and it wasn't like he was double covered the whole game. So if Tennessee can take that short game away and make Stetson go over the top or throw the deep out, that might have J.T. Daniels warming up in the bullpen. I would not be surprised either way if J.T. Daniels did or didn't play in this football game.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, obviously, if you compare what Stetson did a week ago, I mean, listen, the subplot to all of this is that's Bennett's not the guy I thought would be playing quarterback for Georgia. But when you look at the overall numbers last week, had Jamie Newman put those numbers up, I wouldn't have really questioned them at all. I would have just taken that as, hey, Georgia's got an effective starting quarterback. If JT Daniels had put up those numbers, I wouldn't have really questioned them. I would have just assumed that Georgia had a capable starting quarterback. What Bennett did a week ago, even though this is not the guy that I assume would be the starting quarterback for Georgia, what he put up is the kind of stuff that really any starting quarterback, I think, this early in the season would be expected to do for Georgia. His numbers are commensurate with pretty much anything that Georgia's had in that spot going back a number of years, really.
Sure, so far so good, but I think as the season goes on, a lot of the newness that George is doing with Todd Monken. I think the book kind of gets out. And I think good defensive coaches know how to take advantage of quarterback weaknesses. And, let's face it, there's a reason Stetson Bennett was a four-string quarterback and wasn't a scholarship offer. The arm strength is a big question. And when they play teams that are able to take away those short throws with either tight coverage or a decent pass rush, and Stetson's forced to throw it long, he's going to be challenged. We saw that in a couple deep throws last week. We saw Karis Jackson have to hold up and wait on a deep pass. We saw Matt Landers lose a pass in the light. If Stetson Bennett can overcome that and continue to play well, of course he's going to stay in there. But I think sooner or later defense will catch up, and you go with the better quarterback, the more skilled guy. That's J.T. Daniels.
Well, obviously it's a huge test against the Tennessee defense. Let me say one more thing on quarterbacks. I want to talk about Cade Mays here for a couple of minutes. Here's one of the things we've seen in the SEC thus far. KJ Costello has a really good performance week 1 against LSU, but could not maintain that same level of play the following week against Arkansas. I think you'll see the same thing about Bo Nix, who had a pretty good game against Kentucky week 1, obviously could not maintain that against a very good Georgia defense in week 2. When you're only playing SEC teams, maintaining consistency of a high level of play week to week is just going to be really difficult to do. So for Stetson Bennett, who did get the job done last week, just based on the other SEC quarterbacking performances this week, going out there and matching that again against what I think of as a pretty good Tennessee defense, that is a difficult job, even comparing him to other SEC quarterbacks who've kind of run into trouble trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's a nice offense Todd Monken has going there with a lot of high percentage plays. And like I said, he's a great play caller. You saw that with 9 of 14 on third down. That's what Stetson told us as well, the play calling. It's going to be interesting. Steve Spurrier pointed out Arkansas used the pass coverage that Washington had used against Mike Leach, and that Mike Leach and Mississippi State can expect to see that defense called again and again and again. So let's keep an eye on how teams defend Mississippi State, and let's find out if there's a book on Todd Monken and the Georgia offense and what happens when that happens. Right? It's a game of adjustment. As you said, DA, it changes every week, and the competition in the SEC is certainly challenging.
So let me move on to Cade Mays here for a couple of minutes. There are plenty of times when Kirby Smart says something where I'll maybe raise some skepticism and say, I'm not quite sure I believe that. But what he said about Mays on Monday and Jeremy Pruitt, I completely believe and totally take Smart at his word on. He says that Jeremy Pruitt's just kind of doing what you need to do to try to get a player eligible. I would say the Mays family, even though the phrase of like toxic environment and things like that gets a lot of headlines, they're essentially just throwing elbows to try to get their son eligible again. I think to a degree, all is somewhat fair when it comes to the SEC. I don't like the rule. I don't mind telling you I don't think Mays should be immediately eligible because I think it has the potential of sowing chaos within the SEC. And frankly, I don't like the way in which the system incentivized making these grandiose claims of how bad you had it at your old school. I don't like that, but I blame the system more so than Mays. The point I'm getting to, Mike, is, and I'm curious if you agree, I think there's a lot of rich storylines between Georgia and Tennessee right now that really have very little to do with Mays. For as much as we've talked about him leading into this game on Saturday, I just think he's one of the 22 players on the field when he's out there, and I don't think his involvement in this game has any kind of outsized influence in the storyline. Do you agree or not?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, it doesn't take much for these Georgia players to get fired up. I mean, it was only 4 years ago when Tennessee came in here undefeated and riding a 10-game win streak and won that game on the Hail Mary. A lot of these guys were watching that game. They know, Kirby Smart knows, he's never beaten Tennessee as a player. So this is a rivalry game, and Georgia's playing for something. It's not like Tennessee's the only one playing for something. I mean, Georgia, these guys have worked really hard. There's a reason why Damian Newman was the only guy to opt out. A lot of talent on the team. As for that rule, BA, I think in January, even though there is going to be a one-time transfer that I believe will be passed, I expect the SEC to go back to putting a restriction on guys and making them sit out a year. I think this COVID was a one-time thing. I think the SEC will go back to make guys sit out a year, even though it's a free one-time transfer around the country. I don't think they want that tampering and free agency start talked about.
I do expect there to be a little chippiness, but that's with the Mays. If he was wearing a Georgia uniform, he'd be playing chippy too, right? I mean, that's just kind of what he does. He plays to the echo of the whistle. So I do expect there to be a moment during the game where there's maybe a little bit of pushing and shoving and things like that. But I honestly don't believe that's going to be because, Mays has put on a different uniform. Mike, I just think that's the way that Cade Mays plays, and I think the Georgia players are kind of fine playing that way too.
Yeah, this is a series that's let's face it. I mean, nobody pretends to like each other. There's a lot of bad injury history in this series. I've seen a lot of talented guys go down. It's typically a very chippy and physical game. In fact, Kirby Smart said he felt like his guys might have got out physical a little bit last year. He said that was one of Georgia's worst games. So, I think there's some incentive on both sides. I don't think there'll be any love lost. And I think Tennessee's going to come into Sanford Stadium and try and make a statement there for real. They're going to push. It's going to be up to Georgia to push back.
I didn't intend to ask you about this. We got a little bit of time left, so I'll squeeze this in real quick. I know you wrote about this at DawgNation.com. I think that Brenton Cox speaking up on the Georgia game this far ahead of that for Florida after a couple of weeks in which Florida's defense has played pretty miserable, even if Cox's stats are by themselves kind of okay. I think this is so typical Florida. I think this is exactly what Georgia will need when that game comes around. Listen, I don't have a problem with Brenton Cox going to play at Florida. Guys want to be on the field, and Florida gave him a chance to do that. But this notion that he's already circling the Georgia game, and this is personal for him right there, this is just typical Florida silliness, and Brenton Cox fits in so well at Florida if he's already talking trash about a game that's several weeks away. That's all I need to know that this rivalry is going to continue along the same trend that it's been on. If Florida, from a kind of a trash talk pregame standpoint, is kind of keeping this same thing going, Georgia's going to be more than ready to play this game coming up in a couple Saturdays.
Yeah, I say one grudge match at a time. It is interesting, BA, to see him commenting on a game that's still a month away. It's like he's got to take care of business against a couple other teams. He's got A&M and LSU, but Brenton is off to a good start. He does lead their team in tackles for loss, and he fought hard to get that number 1 jersey, and he's making good on his second opportunity. As far as what happened at Georgia, I think he's got to take responsibility for that. I mean, we don't know everything, obviously, but we know what we saw, and we know what happened to him in the spring semester. So just a local guy that needed a second chance somewhere else. He'll have a chip on his shoulder, and I'm sure he'll try to carry that throughout the locker room. But at the end of the day, they still got to get in the end zone. That's something they couldn't do until the fourth quarter last year, and I don't know why anybody thinks it's going to be any different this year with all those same Georgia guys back on defense.
All right, Mike, good stuff. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We will look forward to catching up with you again very soon. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, listen, I'm a fan. I love the SEC, and it's the rivalries in the SEC that make this sport so much fun. So, there's a degree to which that, like, the Cade May stuff does make the Georgia-Tennessee game a little more interesting, because it's like a lot of the stuff in the SEC where there's just a lot of like cross-pollination or overlap between programs. Geographically they're so close. It's one of the reasons why I'm very happy that the SEC has maintained some sense of geography while other conferences kind of going the other way. I mean, now the ACC stretches from like Boston to Miami. I mean, like there's no cultural connection with the ACC. It's not Tobacco Road anymore. It's like the entire Eastern Seaboard. Same thing for the Big Ten, which used to kind of have this like sort of Midwestern flair to it, and most of the schools kind of had the same kind of tie with each other. As they've expanded, they've kind of crossed over into some geographical boundaries. You don't quite have that as much. Obviously the SEC's kind of pulled a school from the Southwest and pulled a school from the Midwest, so you've got that some, but the heart, the epicenter of the SEC is still all here in the Southeast. So you do have a guy that, from Knoxville, goes to Georgia briefly, goes back. Brenton Cox, from the state of Georgia, ends up at Florida. You do have some of that, and it does make the plots thick when these teams get ready to play. Ultimately, I think Mays is a player on Saturday just like any other. I think Brenton Cox, when the actual game is played between Georgia and Florida, I don't expect him to have any kind of outsized spotlight on him. But I do think saying that you're already viewing the Georgia-Florida game as some sort of personal thing for you, and that you're looking forward to getting that W, that's the kind of thing that Scott Sinclair will use to his advantage. And I say the Georgia strength coach in particular, because that would seem to be the way this kind of stuff gets handled. Georgia will do its talk with its helmets on the field, and kind of the second half of the season when maybe guys are a little fatigued, maybe there's a tendency to want to be a little sluggish. This is just a good reminder of how big that Georgia-Florida rivalry is, and in a year in which, fewer fans in the stands, cocktail party going to feel a little bit different. This is just kind of a reminder of, still plenty of opportunity to make this feel like a really big game. Let me also say this, too, really quickly here, speaking of big games. A big game today for the Atlanta Braves. They continue the division series after a really fun win yesterday against the Miami Marlins. Nice pitching performance by Max Fried. Obviously, some late inning heroics of the Braves to come back to get this game one win, and they get back going later on this afternoon. I was at the Battery yesterday, soaking up that atmosphere. So much fun. I know a lot of you kind of made plans to do that as well. They got the watch party inside Truist Park. If you go to Braves.com, you can learn a lot more about this. All the kind of watch parties, the stuff the Braves have going on, you can check all that out with our friends at the Atlanta Braves. Really good stuff for them as they're trying to make this feel like a really fun postseason right now, even though the Braves are kind of sequestered over in Houston. Still some ways to kind of be around other Braves fans. Braves.com, you can learn a lot more about that. All right, SEC through here really quick. So we do have an official change in the SEC this Saturday. LSU was set to host Missouri, and they were doing so as about a 20.5-point favorite. Because of tropical weather moving through the Gulf Coast, that game has now been reversed to Columbia, Missouri. So what was supposed to be an LSU game will now be a Missouri home game. And I guess I'll say here really quick, good job by LSU for agreeing to do this. I was joking with Connor Riley before the show began. If LSU was slated to go to Tuscaloosa, my guess is they might not be quite so accommodating about the venue change. Missouri right now probably not good enough to beat LSU, no matter where the game is played, especially given the, limited fans in normal situations. There may be no fans for the Missouri LSU game, as far as I know, just given how late this is all being changed here. But good job by LSU for finding a way to keep the game on the schedule. I guess it'll be interesting to see how much the point spread has changed here. Do we see a few point move in the direction of Missouri now? We'll obviously watch that and see. LSU fresh off a road win last week, kind of easily dusting Vanderbilt. I think a lot of folks were expecting maybe the Missouri game would be kind of a pushover for LSU as well. We'll see how the venue change impacts any of that, but I'm just glad to know that in a year in which we're all on pins and needles for COVID-related cancellations or postponements, the fact that we're not at least worrying about a weather-related thing when it comes to this right here. There are other games, I guess, in the SEC that are thought to be, heavily impacted by this. One in particular that I've heard about is Alabama Ole Miss. Now, there's no talk right now about moving that, I don't believe, but there is talk about really heavy rains coming into Oxford around the time that game is played. Frankly, I'm not either meteorologically or geographically smart enough to know the other SEC games that might be heavily impacted by this, but I do know there has been a ton of chatter about Alabama Ole Miss and some rain moving in there. And for two teams on Saturday that you'd think would want to throw the ball, it'll be interesting to see, kind of what some of that means for that. But there is a venue switch for LSU and Missouri. No talk about that officially yet when it comes to Alabama and Ole Miss, but that, but weather expected to be a factor there. We'd also talked a little early in the week about the fact that there is still rain in the forecast for Georgia and Tennessee on Saturday. But maybe there's some hope that this early in the week there's still time for that forecast to kind of move through, and maybe the heaviest stuff not hitting until after the game is over on Saturday afternoon. So we'll continue to watch that. And we will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, I also want to talk a little bit more about kind of a subject we hit a little bit last week. That Georgia's in a stretch of games right now where it's playing not only some of its biggest on-field rivals, it's playing some of its biggest recruiting rivals too. And, last week with Georgia-Auburn, I had five-star linebacker Smile Mondon on my mind. We talked to Jeff about this. Jeff Sintel, when he joined us last week for DawgNation Daily. He'll obviously have Before the Hedges presented by Kroger tonight, and he'll kind of address more of some of these key recruiting battles. Jeff's actually got a really good piece up when it comes to Mondon at DawgNation.com. Jeff catching up with him as of late, going to give you an idea of kind of what his thought process is there at the moment. And much the same way that Georgia and Auburn going head-to-head for Mondon, Georgia and Tennessee, this upcoming Saturday's opponent, they've also gone head-to-head for a few guys in this cycle. Mondon is actually one of those guys. It seems like Tennessee's no better than bronze medalist right there. But, kind of a Marius Mims or maybe Tyrone Ingram-Dawkins, Nyland Green possibly. There are some head-to-head recruiting battles going on between Georgia and Tennessee at the moment. Kirby last week did, when he was asked about, what are you able to do from a recruiting standpoint right now? It's a dead period. Normally these big home games should be bringing in a ton of visitors. You'd really be rolling out the red carpet. In the absence of being able to do that, what can you do with all of this right now? This is what Kirby answered that question with last week.
There is none. I mean, everybody's trying to, celebrate recruits virtually, and that's about all you can do. They can't come. So there's not a lot we can do. Try to generate an awesome atmosphere with our fans. Make social media videos, FaceTime guys when we can. It's just not a lot we can do. Maybe somebody's doing something better than us, but we can't fill up the stands. That's the best way to impress them, and probably the next best way is to play well, and that's what we need to do.
I think Smart at the end there kind of addresses an interesting point. I think a lot of times we overestimate the value of a game result on recruiting because there's really two ways to go with this. If the team that's trying to recruit a player wins, they can say, hey, you want to come here and you can be a part of, great success and all the fun things that we're doing. However, if you're a program that's recruiting a player and you lose a game, well, that in itself also becomes kind of fodder for recruiting too, because you go to that same recruit and you say, see, this is how bad we need you. And listen, I would not discount the role of, see, this is how bad we need you. I would not discount the role that plays on players who ultimately make a decision, because obviously the chance at early playing time is always going to be one of the things that pulls a recruit into a program. So I wouldn't discount that. But you do wonder during this time of year in which, guys can't take the visit and all they can tell about the various atmospheres of programs and kind of what they see on TV, you do almost wonder if game results this year won't do more to sway recruits than maybe they've done in the past. For instance, for a guy like Smile Mondin, who's been thought to kind of be, lingering back and forth between maybe Auburn or Georgia, the fact that Georgia wins that game and wins it so decisively, does that impact Mondin in a way that in a normal year that might not quite be the case? And for a lot of the guys that maybe Georgia's going head-to-head with when it comes to Tennessee, does another Georgia win against the Vols just further cement the idea that UGA is still the place you want to be, and Tennessee might be a spot that recruits in future years strongly consider, but as of now, no better than a silver medalist in a race like that with Georgia? I think this is all very fascinating. It's unprecedented times. The chatter as of late would lead you to believe that Georgia's actually weathered all this pretty well and still put itself in a position for an elite class, even though they haven't been able to use a lot of the tricks and tools they typically might use. But as a way of kind of wrapping this up and kind of summarizing, all of this recruiting chatter, it is time to start thinking about recruiting again. We've had big games on the field, and that's where our focus has been. But we're only, I think, a week away from Marius Mims making his decision this time next week. So recruiting storylines are about to be big again. Updates as these guys go through their senior seasons, and in the case of Mims, a big announcement coming up. Time to start thinking about recruiting again. It is on the scene. And, of course, here around DawgNation, we will be on top of all of it. Let me also say this really quick before we wrap up. Many of you are very kind to let me know that you enjoyed on Monday when we played Crank That by Soulja Boy to begin the show as a way of celebrating the Georgia-Auburn win. I'm glad that you enjoyed that, because I am sad to report that we also got briefly suspended by YouTube for playing the commercial music there on that. So I don't know that we'll be cranking any more Soulja Boy here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort again anytime soon. But every now and then we may see if we can slip something like that past the big tech overlords. But on Monday, they caught us playing the commercial music, and we got our hands slapped for a couple minutes there by YouTube. So for those of you who enjoyed that, I'm glad you did. Big Tech was not happy with our little overture there. But let me tell you what does make me happy. It's Gator Hater Updater. Bretton Cox, everybody else needs to know it. Internalize this number, because it's only getting bigger. 1,439 days. Thanks for being here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. And on video. Time now for your R.S. Andrews cool down. We appreciate all of you being with us, and certainly appreciate our friends at R.S. Andrews for making this all possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's just one of the reasons why we love our friends at R.S. Andrews, so make sure you check them out today. All right, let me go to, I think, YouTube first, if y'all don't mind, because I know I did Facebook first yesterday. Let's do YouTube first today. We'll take a few of your comments, and we'll let you kind of get going after that. Zach Tilley says Tennessee has been beating UGA in recruiting all year. What the hell are you talking about, BA? Give me an example of a head-to-head win Tennessee's had over Georgia. Maybe I'm not remembering any of those right now. But you can remind me. Maybe I'm overlooking that. Stuart Nick says, stop the run, constant quarterback pressure, and trust our safeties and cornerbacks. They should win a contested battle 60 to 70% of the time. We force 5+ turnovers on defense. That will be Kirby's defensive Picasso. I like all of that. Scott Harris says Kirby does extremely well against coaches that he doesn't like. I don't think Pruitt's one of those guys. I think Kirby's fine with Pruitt. I don't think he likes Mullen. I don't think he likes Malzahn. But, Pruitt is kind of in the same fraternity with Kirby. They're kind of cut from the same cloth. So I think Georgia will have plenty of motivation to win this game on Saturday, but it's not the same kind of stuff as like an Auburn game or a Florida game where Kirby doesn't like the guy on the other sideline. I think Kirby likes Pruitt probably fine, if I had to guess. Timothy Sayo says, and I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, Timothy. He says, what are your thoughts on Stetson's mobility? Saw some solid footwork, but again, I don't know squat. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be a scout either, but obviously his ability to keep plays alive speaks for itself. Everyone's referencing the big third down scramble that led to the throw to Kearis Jackson. That's a big-time play. And even if it was someone unorthodox, he kept his back to the defense for a pretty long time on that one. That's a little unorthodox, I guess, there. The honest truth is you can't argue with the result. Stetson Bennett did some really athletic things for Georgia on Saturday. I think that's one of the things that he's kind of always been sneaky good at. It's probably one of the reasons why he was a good stand-in for Baker Mayfield during Rose Bowl prep a couple of years ago, because Bennett does seem to be kind of good at kind of dancing around until a receiver gets open. I'm going to extrapolate way more than I have any right to do, but if you go back and look at his 1 year playing Mississippi junior college football, his numbers were pretty bad. It's almost like, I'm assuming here, when he's dancing around waiting for someone to get open at the junior college level, maybe he didn't have a Kearis Jackson to throw to, so a lot of that dancing around just sort of led to a ball that you finally just had to try to force into somebody maybe. But, yeah, I think that Bennett's playing really well. I'll go so far as to say this. If JT Daniels had played for Georgia on Saturday, I don't believe Daniels would have put up better numbers than Stetson Bennett did. That's not to say that I don't eventually think that Stetson Bennett may be surpassed by Daniels and Daniels becomes Georgia's starting quarterback. I think there's maybe a pretty good chance that happens. But I don't necessarily assume that Georgia got a lesser level of play because Bennett played this past weekend, nor do I think that Georgia is set up for a lesser level of play because Bennett's playing on Saturday. Eventually, Daniels may prove himself to be, the better of the quarterbacks here. But, if you want to go back and look at, I don't even, want to go down this road necessarily, but if you want to go back and look at Daniels' year of starting at USC, there were games that he played and started in against lesser defenses that were not as good as the stats that Bennett put up on Saturday. So, I am not in a hurry right now to move Stetson Bennett out of his job. I think that in a long season of very intense competition, Georgia will have to keep looking at its best options at quarterback. And, JT Daniels is a guy that, does have some credentials that will make him get probably an extra long look at some point in time. But, this notion that, the clock is ticking on Bennett, and it's just a matter of time until JT Daniels moves in. With the way that Bennett played on Saturday, I think he's earned the right not to look over his shoulder this Saturday. In other words, I'll go so far as to say this. Let's say that Bennett struggles a little bit this week. You will not hear me, whether it be just whoever happens to be sitting by me in the press box or in the forum at forum.dawgnation.com or on our DawgNation postgame show. You will not hear me calling for a hook. I reserve the right to change my mind, but, if we're talking about just some sort of minor struggles, things like that, Bennett's been there enough for you through 2 weeks that I think he ought to have a pretty long leash going into Saturday. I won't be calling for any kind of quarterback hook if he struggles a little bit on Saturday. I won't be doing that. Real Caged says second string should be the discussion, and I'm sure that some of that's going on. Nature Gator says anyone trying to deny how good the UJ defense is biased. They make very few mistakes and are always around the ball with impressive quickness. So kind of a classy statement there from Nature Gator on one of the Gators' hated rivals. John Hendrick says give JT a few series on Saturday. I wonder, just given the way that Bennett's played, I think he's maybe earned the right to take these snaps. GB2 says, I say Kenny McIntosh gets a touchdown Saturday with a kickoff return. I'll say this again this past Saturday. Bam! He is shot out of a cannon on these kick returns. He had a couple against Arkansas, had one again last week. I mean, that straight line speed, he gets a big head of steam, man. That's a degree of athleticism as a kick returner that you didn't necessarily know you're going to get from him. Buddy Lee Z says, do you think Milton should get more carries? I do. I do believe he's in line for more carries. And I think that he's eventually going to be a really big part of the Georgia running game. Jason Crosby says this is the fastest and biggest defense I've seen out of Georgia. I would agree with that. Their dynamism within the front seven, athletic defensive linemen, I think it's really impressive. And I'll tell you where it's going to show up. For some reason, I was thinking about this today. Georgia does play Mississippi State later on this year. And, like one of the challenges for a team like this is you want to drop a bunch of guys back into coverage, right? Because that would seem to be just the Mississippi State Achilles heel. When you put a bunch of guys back into coverage, you narrow out those throwing lanes. That can be a way of kind of stymieing the Mike Leach air raid. But it ought to make you susceptible against the run. Now, last week, Tylen Hill was a little bit banged up, and Mike Leach is pretty stubborn when it comes to calling running plays. So Mississippi State didn't really do a lot of that kind of stuff. But let's say that Hill is healthy when Georgia plays Mississippi State. And let's say that Georgia is doing like what, Barry Odom did last week and what, I'm assuming that Mark Stoops' team does this week. You drop a bunch of guys in coverage, maybe show them a good bit of zone. You're left with limited personnel to stop the run. But this is what makes Georgia so tough. Because you do have Jordan Davis, because you do have Monty Rice, because you have guys like this, you can still play the run with like limited run personnel in a game because the guys that you do have are just so solid up the middle. That's one of the things you'll see. I think that'll come into play against Alabama a little bit too, where you also have to have a bunch of guys in coverage. And when you can, when you can be stout against the run without having a bunch of like run-stopping bodies in the game, you just have a much better chance of winning against these explosive offense. And that's one of the areas in which I think the Georgia defense is really, really very good. All right, Facebook comments now. And of course, we appreciate all of you being with us here today. William and Elaine Morgan says, no changes, keep going with what is working. I would say on Saturday, that's probably exactly what Georgia does. Joel Moody says, Georgia wins the rushing battle by a 2-1 margin, wins the game by double digits. Well, I would say the one definitely begats the other, so I believe you're on track there with that. Matt Rukavina feels like he's got the Jim Chaney playbook figured out, and I'm sure a lot of Georgia fans at times felt that way too. Jermaine King says 2020 is a weird year. We definitely need to have multiple quarterbacks ready. They need some playing time. Yeah, I think that's true. And, I kind of joked about this last Saturday, that in a year in which Jamie Newman had already been hyped, and JT Daniels had already been hyped, in a year in which Dwan Mathis had already been hyped, that Stetson Bennett was destined to become the fourth different Georgia quarterback to be hyped in this year alone. And, when it was Newman coming in, he was the Heisman guy. And I'm saying this casually. And then it's JT Daniels, so he's going to be the guy. That's a future first-round pick. And then it's Dwan Mathis, and he's the, you had, with all due respect to a guy that I really like, David Pollack, comparing him to Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields and guys like that. And now it's Stetson Bennett, who's like Connor Riley was showing me yesterday. He's on the Heisman board, getting Heisman odds and things like that. And I think all of this is too much. And as Jermaine kind of alluded to, in a weird year like this, the Georgia quarterback storyline has the potential of changing a few more times before the season is done. If you're a fan, you just need the guy that's in there to play well while he's there. And if he gets removed because of COVID or because of injury, or if, Bennett, like a lot of SEC quarterbacks have happened, has a hard time maintaining the same level of play, then you've got to be ready to suit up somebody else and go out there and do it with him. The Bennett story is fun, and while it's ongoing, I'm going to choose to enjoy it. And I would say that there's a chance it lasts a lot longer than maybe some of us thought it was going to last. But as Jermaine said, this is probably still a year in which you've got to have some confidence in more than just one quarterback. Nick Vernon says 24-13, wet weather, run the ball, nasty conditions, take the under, mark it down. For those of you that do like gambling and stuff like that, part of me wants to reach out to some of the people in the gambling community because I wonder if there's anything in college football that's as much of a sure thing right now as Georgia and the under. You just can't make the under total low enough right now. Georgia's essentially under every single week. I guess the one time in the last, really in about a calendar year, the only time that Georgia didn't go under was when it exploded for 52 against Tech. I think that's the only time. Other than that, you have to go back to the Tennessee game a year ago for the last time that Georgia hit an over, and they only hit that because of a defensive touchdown. I mean, there's just not very many things in college football that are more of a sure thing than that. It is really, really amazing, and obviously you're afraid to set the number too low because then it becomes, easy to surpass on the other side. But at a certain point in time, just given the fact that, the Georgia defense is so stingy and the Georgia offense is still trying to figure some things out, playing games in the 30s is just is just kind of a part of it. And normally for teams that are big favorites, really low totals can usually be a little bit of an opportunity to take the underdog. It's hard to cover a big number with a low total. Just the math kind of makes sense on that. But with Georgia, they even kind of confound that because the defense is just not giving up anything. Brian Carter says, how impressed are you with the new kicker? I would say that Pod's really done his job through a couple of weeks. I think the transition away from a guy like Rodrigo Blankenship, who just seems like he was Georgia's kicker for 1,000 years, when you transition to a new kicker, it's never going to be seamless. But I would say for the most part, Lesney's kind of done his job here thus far. Brian Jones says, any chance that Georgia's looking past Tennessee? I really don't think so. I don't think Georgia does that kind of stuff. I do truly believe the kind of week-to-week motivation is something that Georgia is really good at. Now, are there staff members looking past Tennessee? There absolutely are. I thought Kirby was kind of interesting yesterday in talking about John Jancic, former Rick staffer, now back on the Georgia staff as a quality control guy. Defensive-minded coaches working with the offense, essentially doing advanced scouting on defense to provide information for the offense. When you have resources like Georgia, that's what you're able to do. So they're probably an army of people in the Georgia building, and maybe Jancic's one of these, who's only thinking about Alabama right now, working tirelessly, 20 hours a day, getting ready for Alabama. But those people are quarantined away from the, the on-field coaching staff for the, for everything else, from the folks who are getting ready for Tennessee. I don't think you have to worry about Georgia getting caught looking ahead very much, even to a high-profile game like Alabama. And as I've kind of said, I think most of you are on the same page with me about this. Tennessee is good enough not to be a tune-up game for Alabama. Auburn last week, even though Georgia won the game comfortably, is good enough that it's not just a tune-up game for Alabama. So I think Tennessee's good enough to get Georgia's attention. The various position groups know they're in for a, kind of a challenge. But have no fear if you want a little bit of advanced scouting on Alabama from the people who don't have an on-field coaching role with Georgia right now. I think you're probably getting some of that too. Somebody mentions Tyson Campbell. Let me see who this is. Mark Brantley says Tyson Campbell balling out against Auburn gives the recipe for shutting down Kyle Pitts. Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I just think Campbell is coming into his own as a good player. He's not a prospect anymore. He's a product. He's a very, very good player. Very good player. Ray June Johnson likes Kendall Milton. Somebody had a funny shirt. I think I didn't see this comment all the way around, but I think he said, a T-shirt that says all the Georgia quarterbacks for the Heisman. That's about right. This has been one of those years where you could have the Newman scratched out, the Daniel scratched out, the Mathis scratched out, and I think we'll hear from Dwan again, but you know what I'm saying. There was a little too much, hype going into the start of the Arkansas game, and then like the Bennett written in pencil. It's like people just pivot very quickly to a different Georgia quarterback as a Heisman, candidate. Gary Holt says Mathis did not look happy going into the end of the game. I think we've seen that before. I have no reason to believe that Dwan Mathis is anything other than a great teammate. I really don't. I think body language can be misleading. I would imagine, just based on what I think I know about Dwan, that he's as happy as anybody about the way that Stetson Bennett's playing. Dwan also knows he's got a lot of football left to go. I really would not be in the least bit concerned about about Dwan Mathis unhappy. I think body language sometimes can just be misleading. And I feel pretty confident in saying that. A few more. Connor Graham says, are you concerned about Bennett's arm strength? It's obviously not as strong of an arm, but I haven't seen him yet attempt a throw that he couldn't make. How about that? Ronald Lee Shepard disagrees. Mathis looked upset. Yeah, I just don't see it that way. I really don't. Blake Wilson says you can be disappointed and still support your team. I mean, there's no doubt Mathis is a competitor, probably, likes to play, but I don't see the planted seeds of a quarterback controversy here between these guys. I don't. Daniel Brader says Tennessee's got a solid offensive line, but our speed on defense should be an edge. Yeah, I think that's probably true. Steve Rowland says, how about the Richard LeCounte situation? If you're referencing the targeting call, LeCounte's fine for this upcoming Saturday. His moment happened in the first half. He sat the second half. He's good to go for Saturday. James Crump says, after seeing Daniels, I wish that Ringo was healthy this season. Well, if Ringo was healthy, he'd probably be playing some. I don't put a ton on Daniel on Saturday, though, against Auburn. There are obviously a couple of moments when it looked like Schwartz had a step on him. But I don't take that as, some sort of proof that Daniel's a deficient player. And I'm not just trying to, cover up for him either. I think that Daniel's a guy that's still going to be playing a ton for Georgia, and I think that's a guy that you're going to be happy that Georgia has. I mean, he clearly got beat a couple of times, but I might not put all of that quite on him. Jim Faulkner, good to see you over at Truist Park yesterday there as well. Go Dogs and keep chopping. I agree with you on both those fronts. Trey Edwards says, I don't know why Smith wasn't given a chance to say cornerback over Daniels. I really think that Daniel's a better player than maybe some of y'all think. I think that, Daniel got maybe picked on a little bit last year, and, certainly Schwartz got a step on him a couple times on Saturday. I mean, Chris Smith got to play a good bit at safety, obviously once Richard LeCounte went down. But I still think that Daniel's a pretty good player. Remember, this is a guy that was on the field in place of what we, might think of as like a healthy Eric Stokes at times. I mean, I think that Daniel's a pretty good player in Georgia's mind. And I don't have any reason to disagree with that. All right, it is late. We got to get ready. DogFan3 says, any chance they move the start of the game back because of the weather? I don't think so. I mean, I guess anything is possible, but just given the fact they want to have this on CBS at 3:30, poor CBS just wants the college football games it can get. I guess anything is possible, but I also was under the impression, and like I said before, I'm the last one you want to follow for weather. I don't ever read the weather very well. I thought the weather was supposed to be coming in later as opposed to earlier. But, I mean, as we get closer, tomorrow's the day to start getting really pretty serious about the weather. That's around the time you want to start trying to get really serious about this. But I think just given the fact that it's supposed to be CBS at 3:30, they would do everything they can to keep it at that time. Frank Patterson says that CBS college football music is classic. Yeah, there's a viral video that's kind of gone around where somebody has put the CBS music with folks dancing. I love it. When the league finally leaves, by the way, Brad Nestor from CBS will be with us tomorrow. But when the league leaves CBS and that music's not there anymore, it's going to really, really stink. I did hear something kind of interesting. I guess that CBS is offering to sell this music. I don't know what the royalty fee on something like that would be, but what if we bought the CBS music and that became the DawgNation Daily theme song? I don't know how expensive the da 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 da. I don't know how expensive that would be, but maybe we could buy that. Noah Sheldon says, what's the status on Makaya Tong? Tong was a guy I know that was, kind of involved in the scrimmage a couple of weeks ago. So he was getting some reps there, but he's like a lot of these guys in that, you're just kind of caught up in some numbers here at the moment. Tommy Bush didn't travel to Arkansas as a for instance on this. He may have been a little bit banged up, but, he didn't travel in that game. That you've just got more players and you've got spots for guys right now, and Tong may be kind of caught up in that numbers game here at the moment. Let's see what else. Nathan Morris says it's only a 20% chance of rain right now at 3:30. See? Nathan Morris bringing some good news. That's what I need more of right there. Green Soldier says, what should we expect from McKitty and JT when they get snaps? As I said about McKitty a little earlier, I think that he's going to be a pretty big part of the offense. I mean, I think one of the things that sometimes we kind of get misled on is the notion that on a passing play with 4 different receivers running routes, potential pass catchers, that they're all equally likely to get the ball, delivered to them, and that's not true. There's a hierarchy, and a lot of these are kind of dummy routes. And sometimes at Georgia, I think the tight end's kind of been a little bit of a dummy route, not really an intended target on a passing play. I don't think that's going to be the case for McKitty. I think he's going to have a little bit more primacy within the passing structure than maybe some, previous tight ends have had because, as Kirby has pointed out, you see a lot of man coverage in the SEC every single week. And when you think about number 1 corner against number 1 wide receiver and number 2 corner against number 2 wide receiver and kind of on down the list you go, by the time you get to Trey McKitty, that's a potential matchup advantage in favor of Georgia because McKitty's one of these guys they can kind of use as a little bit more of a flex in. I want to oversell this. I'm not trying to tell you that he's going to be Georgia's version of Kyle Pitts. I'm not trying to put that on him. But the kind of guy that Georgia really throws to, I would expect that to be the case. As far as Daniels goes, if and when he's called upon to play, I think that I think he'll probably do well, or at least he has a great chance of doing well. But I don't expect him to play necessarily all that much better than what Stetson Bennett's given you the last week and a half. DogFan3 says, do you expect A&M to play better on Saturday? I do. I'm a big believer in last stands, teams that don't want to go out without a fight. I think Kentucky's in a last stand situation on Saturday against Mississippi State. I think that A&M's in a last stand situation against Florida. I mean, Jimbo Fisher got like an $80 million contract or whatever it is. I don't think he wants to be 1-2 through 3 weeks with his only win being a close call against Vanderbilt. That's not quite getting it done. Now, I also think that for the most part, A&M fans have fairly reasonable expectations. I don't think they've ever been better than 6-2 in the SEC in any year since they've been here. So a 7-3 season this year, I think, would be a pretty good year for A&M. So they're not done by a long shot, but they don't want to be this dejected this early in the year. So I expect them to give Florida a pretty big shot on Saturday. And Mike Elko's no joke as a defensive coordinator. Having a little bit of a game plan for Pitts, I could see that being the case. And certainly Florida's defense got a ton to figure out. And by the way, what's his name? Why am I blanking on the Texas A&M quarterback's name? Kellen Mond. He's beaten Florida before. Now that's a gazillion years ago, but he's won against Florida before. So do with that what you will. Sean Jenkins says Karis Jackson's the Hines Ward. That's a pretty good comparison. Obviously, you'd love to be as good as Hines Ward. Karis does a lot of things well for Georgia. Matt Rukavina, who lives in Texas, says that Texas A&M defense is just soft, but Florida isn't exactly smash mouth either. Yeah. I wonder if they play Leon O'Neal on Kyle Pitt. That might be something to do. TJ Smith says Jimbo Fisher's overpaid and overrated. Ken Obie Jones on the inaccuracy of forecast more than 48 hours in advance. I would probably agree with him on that. Pretty funny way of saying that too. All right, we got to get ready to go. Matt Rukavina says, when did Texas A&M beat Florida last? I think it was in 2017, so it was not a while ago. It was a while ago. I think it was 2017. Brian Whitehead feels like that Georgia defense is going to be after Garantano on Saturday. Miriam Martin Corbin says the A&M alums have major buyer's remorse right now. Maybe so. Maybe so. She says they are hot about him at the moment. So we'll see. Obviously, for that reason, they need to play a little bit better on Saturday. Chad Buchanan says, can you smell what the monk is cooking? I like that. Joel Moody says, dogs just continue to beat these other SEC teams that are getting unwarranted high ranking. That's fun to think about, too. All right, really good stuff. Thanks all of you for being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Let me remind you on the way out the door to make sure you check out the AJC for all of your Atlanta news now at AJC.com. Falcons, the aftermath of their loss on Monday to the Packers. You can read about that. The current status of Dan Quinn, which doesn't seem to ever really change. Braves, really dramatic moment yesterday. Everything changed once Acuna got hit by the pitch. Like the 80th time the Marlins have hit Acuna. The Braves really got up off the deck after that. It was a fun day out in Houston. Really good Braves coverage there at AJC.com. You can kind of check all of that out. Also, there's an interesting Q&A at the AJC here this week about, what's the healthiest, safest way to be out at a restaurant? How do you make sure that you're keeping you and your family safe when you are out at restaurants? A fun Q&A, not so much fun, but interesting and provocative is probably the best way to say that. You can check that out online, AJC.com as well. All of your Atlanta news now at AJC.com. Huge thanks for you being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Don't forget, later on in the week, it'll be our Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Dari Payro giving his picks of the week. The rest of the Dog Nation team weighing in as well. And speaking of flow, if you want to keep the air conditioning flowing out of your vents, the hot water flowing through your shower and everything else, the way to get peace of mind about all your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs is to check out our friends at R.S. Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com and every day here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. You have a great day. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 10 a.m., everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.